Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire. And today we're here to wrap up Reaper's Gale because I'm done with it. I've just finished it, I don't know, an hour ago. I'm trying to collect my thoughts. You can watch me collecting my thoughts on the last one. There'll be other stuff tomorrow and Sunday, hopefully. Um, and yeah, on Monday we'll start with Toll the Hounds, and there's a lot to talk about in that book. So it might take like 2 weeks to go through Toll the Hounds, I guess. We'll see. Anyway, time to go into the final parts of Reaper's Gale. Let's do this. Cheers. Pretty drinkable. All right, so basically I'm only talking about the last chapter and the epilogue here. Mostly the last chapter, and it's huge. It's once again a very, very long chapter. It's slightly shorter than the Igatan thing, but it's still gigantic, and it touches on a lot of stuff. But it's basically the ending of Letheras. And I feel once again there's a parallel to be made there between the ending of Reaper's Gale and the ending of Memories of Ice in the way of it is structured, and in the way it is structured and what happens there, where you see that both have basically the Malazan army, or in this case the Bone Hunters. The one before it was the Dujak's army with the bridge burners and all of that, coming to end an empire, an empire ruled by the crippled god, through, in each case, obviously a proxy. It was the Panyan Seer in Memories of Ice, and in Reaper's Gale now it's Rudad Sengar with the sword. Now those are obviously very different empires and all of that, but that general structure is similar, that general overarching thing there. And once again, we have, with the last chapters in those two books, we have very long chapters that are basically about the army storming or entering the main cities, Black Coral, in that case still Coral, or Letheras, and dealing in whichever way with the direct tool of the crippled god. And in both cases, it's not a straight up vengeance, and like as we already know with Memories of Ice, obviously the Panyan Seer gets a chance at redemption. Rudat Sengar doesn't get that, but he also doesn't get killed by the Malazan Empire, but in the end by Karsa Orlong in, interesting ways. So we have that basic structure. So once again, we have a lot of these jumps around between different parts of the army, between different parts of between all these different aspects, like different viewpoints, different people that we've talked about before, that we've met before. We have the bridge burners, not bridge burners in this case. We have, in this case, well, still the bridge burners, basically, because Fiddler is the first one into Letheras is Fiddler, a former bridge burner. So the first in, last out thing still kind of goes on, in a way, which, was also the thing why Fiddler tried to be first in Igatan, which he kind of didn't. I feel now he didn't actually get to be first in there, but anyway, it's these small details, I guess, that are totally irrelevant but nice things there. So yeah, we have them entering and opening the doors, the gate of Letheras, and all of that. And there's two things at that point that I wanted to talk about. The first thing is the description of how the main Bone Hunters army after the landing is very much viciously routing the Letheri army and killing and being very brutal and bloodthirsty there. And we have that later on when it's about Fiddler's squad being in the palace and killing everyone. Also a nice way to just kill the Chancellor in this offhand way, which, is cool. He deserves it. Anyway, what I found interesting there is that this is something that we obviously know from real warfare. It's that the whole like payback discussion. I'm obviously not a military historian. I've never been. Have no interest in that. But like years ago, I was took a course like at university when I was doing ancient history, and it was about war crimes in ancient history, and we looked at like different massacres and stuff like that. I mean, when you do ancient history in general, it was basically mostly Greek and Roman history, and for that I read a book on these kind of things, or like the psychological impact of warfare and how we can find it in ancient history. It was called From Milas to Millet, which I kind of recommend, although I do think the author goes a bit far in his analysis. But if that kind of thing interests you, I can highly recommend that book for a straight up history book. At least with academic pretensions, it's pretty accessible, is what I would say here. He goes through, I don't know, looks at what the author thinks are academic, are how to say, signs of PTSD in parts of the Iliad. It's like there's two of them, I think. It's like the madness of Ajax and something else. And that's definitely one of those where I'm not sure if that kind of analysis would hold. And he looks at the massacre of the citizens of Melos, which is part of the Peloponnesian War, um, where and we have several of those in the Peloponnesian War where for whatever reasons we obviously don't know them fully, the entire population, at least the male population of an entire town, was slaughtered, and everyone else sold into slavery, something that was not typical for Greek intercity warfare in the 5th century BC. But we have like those evidences, and the author is trying to look at that as evidence of payback, where after prolonged war, the soldiers actually feel the need to yeah, that all the stress, to release all that stress that has built up throughout a lot of like throughout the war, and all that psychological stress is leads to that kind of explosion of violence that is excessive and hard, like can't be justified in like general military like how to say, there's no strategic value in doing these in massacring these people. So there's that idea in there, and I feel you could read the description there of how the bone hunters are treating the lethery, at least at the beginning or in parts of this chapter, as another one of another occurrence of this idea of payback under that you know under that reading of the subject. But as I said, I'm not an expert in military history. I'm even less actually, like, I have like no experience with actual combat experience or anything like that. I think that's sort of the thing with the author of that book, is that that he is, for all I know, he's still alive, is a Vietnam veteran who then became a professor of history. So he's trying to combine his actual personal experience with his study of ancient history in that regard, similar to, I don't know, Glenn Cook combining his experience as a Vietnam veteran with his experience with writing fantasy stories in the Black Company. But so yeah, it just reminded me of that, so I wanted to toss that out there. So the idea of that things that we associate mostly with modern warfare, they are kind of, because it's the kind of thing we read about in the news, we associate with modern warfare these psychological traumata, these overreactions, massacres, that way and so forth. That those are like a general thing of warfare, and thus will be found both in ancient and medieval history, if you want to look at it. Um, They probably can be found like they're inherent in our human nature and human psyche and under the stress of warfare and in combat, and thus it makes sense to also have these kind of feelings in a fantasy world that is very much about depicting or mirroring our own world and the way we in our own world deal with things. So that makes sense. And it, you know, that's the other thing. The Bone Hunters are not the heroes. They might come to liberate Lether, but we also find out that this is not the end of it, right? That's the other bit that gets finally dropped as a hint there. That the Lethery, that to land in Lether is just the first step, and there's another like there's another part to this campaign that we don't know about yet, but we'll see. So there's that. And that was a small thing that I now those of you who have read more attentively than me, which I hope is most of you, might help me out with that one. And my issue there is that when the gate, that small gate into the wall where the sappers go through and that, like the Marines go through, when it's opened by the Segule, that one Segula champion that obviously leaves the city because she doesn't want to fight the Emperor and so forth, I am a bit like, I was confused because I could not remember reading her leaving the compound. And in other parts, it was said that the Emperor has killed all the champions except two, which would be Karsa, Orlong, and Ikariam. So is that a contradiction? Did I miss something? Or is this actually as close to a Deus Ex Machina that Stephen Erickson comes? Is this an editing oversight or is this a reading oversight on my part? I'm not sure. I just, I feel the Critical Dragon would be the one to tell me about this one. It's like, it feels more like the thing that he would call out. Otherwise, is this situation? It's like it should have been mentioned at some point, and hopefully it isn't. I just missed it. That should have been mentioned at some point. Like that the Segula, just after they healed her wrists and everything, after Karsa Orlong beat her up, that she just took her shit and just left. Which would, maybe I've just missed it. So I don't know. Tell me about it. It just stuck in my mind when I read it today. Like, wait, I didn't know. I thought she was also dead. Which, is dumb because I've read the book before, so I basically knew that bit already in my mind, but yeah. Anyway, it's not exactly an important bit, it's just something that I, realized. All right. So, next bit that might be important. The end of Thrall Sengar is once again a testament to the absolute meaninglessness of violence. It's like, yeah, it's tragic. It's absolute tragedy, and the meaninglessness of it is, I guess, the important bit there. It's like he's gotten all the things, all of that is kind of there. It's I don't know. He finally gets something good out of life, and then he gets just killed more or less by accident or randomly by a random asshole. And then, yeah, that's how violence works in most cases. Most of it is completely small-minded, meaningless violence, because violence is rarely an actual answer to anything. And the grief of Hedge and Quickben obviously is important there. The fact that Hedge, I guess that's the interesting bit there, like Hedge and Quickben were, at least as bridge burners, pretty jaded, right? I mean, they've been soldiers forever, but for a while they've known Trollsengar and they managed to actually be friends with him so much that they are now openly grieving in that way. So that is something that needs to be kept in mind, looked at. Um, all right. What else is important? As I said, it's a huge chapter and there's so much going on there. Um, I feel the next interesting bit to talk about is like the return of Bryce Benedict. And I'm a bit confused there, but only a bit, because I didn't yet now go back to Midnight Tides and recheck, because I always thought there was only one finger of his hand cut off, but apparently it was two. Um, I would need to go back and double check if it was just two fingers and Featherwitch just took one and the other one in whatever way ended up with Tehol and Selush, because I have no idea how that happened, but rat catchers and stuff. So yeah, there that bit is, I mean, we knew that Bruth and Trana did that. I still feel bad for the guy, but apparently he's going back to is trying to get back to the Azath, and I don't know, do stuff with Setch, also known as Knuckles. Um, so yeah, good on him. Bryce Benedict is back, which is cool. Um, there's a lot of like tying off of loose ends there. Hanan Masak gets killed by the Jaghat. Just why not? There's a nice joke that I'm not sure how how much I'm interpreting in there, but for me it reads like a jibe at Discworld when when one of the two obviously more than just drunkards says he's crawling like the turtle of the abyss, and the other one is like, I. Funny that that myth didn't live long, which maybe I'm reading too much into that. So, but um, what else in those bits? I guess another thing there is to look at Featherwitch once more. I still don't know how to actually, if I feel competent enough to actually do an entire video on Featherwitch. I feel she deserves that. She's a pretty. She is a character where it's very simple to hate her for a lot of reasons, but with that ending where we learn once again that she also has been a victim of sexual child abuse there, and has been raped as a kid. There's a thing emerging, an overarching theme within Stephen Erickson's writing in general, and that is, I feel, no, it came up again and again and again, and more often, I guess, now in Reaper's Gale, is that a lot of that childhood trauma is something that has profound effects on our personality, which obviously is true. We basically know that, but if you look at like just Reaper's Gale, you have Triban Gnol, the Chancellor, who has, on the one hand, been apparently had a it's not too explicit, but his trauma or like his personality was twisted in his childhood, and he's now perpetuating that by now also raping children, which is evil. And so you have that, and then you have Beak, who has his whole ongoing childhood trauma with him, right? All the stuff that happened to his brother and to him, and all that bit there. So you have Beak there. Now you have Featherwitch, that was also obviously impacted and twisted by being abused by that other slave, and she completely forgot that and dug herself into like that personality, or built herself into that personality that she became. So there's another one, and that's just now. So I feel one of the key one of the key elements of Stephen Erickson's writing within the Malazan Book of the Fallen is that very the is one of those things. How to say that? One of the things that is important there is him looking at what happens if we don't treat children right. And yeah, I agree with him. I mean, I don't have children because I'm I would be a terrible parent, I can tell you that. So I'd rather not. But yeah, there's that, and I feel it's, once again, we've spoken about this before. The Malazan world, the Malazan Book of the Fallen, is a theme-driven book. It's not so much a plot-driven or character-driven. I mean, you have plot, you have amazing characters, but there's the important bits are the themes, and those are themes that you will also find in like other literary fiction outside of the just outside like outside of just the fantasy genre. I mean, you look at, I don't know, Stephen King, whom I really don't like, but a lot of his stories deal with growing with adolescence or coming of age in a way, and horrible things happening there. At least not, I mean, not all of his stories, but there is that in there as well. If you go to the horror genre in sci-fi, I'm pretty sure you can find some there. I mean, there is a story called Childhood's End, but that one has only a little to do with that. But yes, the idea of the vulnerability of children and the effect if that vulnerability is actually taken advantage of is something that you find everywhere, and it's Stephen Erickson's strength as a writer in these kind of in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, to take these global concerns, these global themes, and put them into his stories, into his books, and showing in that way that yes, the fantasy genre is able to support these concerns, is able to support these themes, is able to yeah, to accommodate all of these things, which is proof, like, against that. I mean, we obviously know better, but the idea that fantasy fiction can only is only is only escapist fiction with no deeper meaning. So that's, I mean, we know that's bullshit because we like to read fantasy books apparently, and we find a lot of interesting things in there. Sometimes it's just escapism, but there's more. And the idea of fantasy literature not being real literature, as some people think, is obviously elitist nonsense. We know that. But Stephen Erickson, as someone who has obviously also written serious literary fiction and gone through these like writers' workshops and stuff like that, is not just claiming that it can be done, but is actually doing it. And I feel that's an important aspect to always keep reminding ourselves when we read these books, and keep in the back of our mind that there is that drive in there. There's that drive in there to actually do more than just tell a compelling story about people with crossbows walking, killing green skin people or other weird fantasy creatures. That's why I usually call all of these fantasy people that he has, like Jagha, Imas, possibly even Kachain Chamal, although we have not met enough of them so far to talk more about that. But the idea is they're all persons, right? They're all people. They're all basically they're human. I mean, not human by species, but by having personalities that need to be taken seriously and evaluated as such. All right, that was something of a detour, which, yeah. Also, well, the errant kills his high priestess. Now, he's not the first one doing that. We remember the story starts. Reaper Scale, not even Reaper Scale. Well, when is it? The Bone Hunters is where it starts. The Bone Hunters start with Drek killing all her worshippers. So we know that gods can do that. It's not just us believers who can kill our gods, it's also the other way around. Gods can kill their believers. So there is that. And now we see it in person when he kills Featherwitch. Now the question is where that's going. The cult of the errant seems to be slightly reborn in a way with fanatics and all of that. But I guess we'll have to wait and look for that in the upcoming books to see what the errant is up to now. What else? Icarium. Icarium is still weird, and Icarium is maybe one of the guys I feel really bad for in the story because, and I feel Icarium is maybe even more of an archetype of what happens if a child gets wounded in a way, because he has, because of what happened in his childhood. Well, what we can call it childhood, in his past, probably childhood. He got wounded and he carries that wound with him. And with that wound, he has the power to destroy the entire world. So he's basically the more abstract version of what we spoke before about how childhood, child abuse can lead to, has dire consequences for everyone, not only the person twisted and broken. So yeah, there is that. But yeah, he enters his machine that he kind of tried to build, and that kind of doesn't fully work. We'll have to wait and see if we can actually figure out what he did there. We will see. It's Icarium, he does weird stuff. Is basically where I'll leave it at this point, because what else can we do? Another thing, I feel like this whole idea of the Emperor killing champions while the world around him falls to pieces, that there is a lot of pathos in there. It also has this grandiose kind of feeling of either Greek tragedy or on the other hand, like history, or not history, but the way some episodes of the fall of the Roman Empire were depicted. Not to say, I don't know, the Byzantine Empire as well, but you know, that whole idea of the empire, and this is like the other thing there. Each and every one of those people are very much focused on their focused on their things and drifting into like singular obsessions, right? You have Karas and Victad being focused on the idea of this puzzle box that Tehol sent him. We have Rotos Himana being focused on figuring out the machine, which in the end seems to have been a model of Icarium's citywide machine, and retreating from reality even further. In that reality, we have Triban Gnoll focusing further on his like hands in that scene. We have Rulat focusing just on killing champions at that point. That's an not overarching, but it's like a theme that is repeated again and again at this point, that these people, since they're all very obsessed with obsessive characters to start with, then dive into that black hole of their obsession in a way. What else? I feel we need to talk about Tehol and Karos Invicta there for a moment. And the acclamation of Tehol as new Emperor of Lether, which is pretty cool. It also, once again, comes back to that idea that Tehol chose certain aspects, I would say, of the story of Jesus Christ in a way. But that's maybe something for a different topic here, but more on an economic level, obviously. Although there are economic aspects to early Christianity as well, as we hopefully all know. But yes, the idea of Karos Invicta completely misunderstanding the idea of economics there when he just like started to throw out that money, and then manipulate the Rat Catchers Guild manipulating the crowd into actually cheering for Tehol. That's like a nice bit. I mean, see, that's sort of the idea. What I mean there is that parallel when you have in the Gospels, when you have that idea, and it was obviously mocked with Life of Brian by Monty Python as well. That scene of having these people of Christ or Brian in that case being locked up, and the crowd outside chanting for their release and not getting. Well, in this case, they're getting it, but So I see there are motifs, there are images from that story that are picked up and commented upon with the story of Tehol Benedict, is what I'm trying to say there. What else is there? I don't know. I feel I'm running out of things to say. Obviously, the reunion between Fiddler and Hedge is something that will have ramifications in the future. Oh yeah, right. Obviously, the ending of of Rulat being killed. Well, not only being killed, but actually the trick there being to actually separate his hands from the sword, or in this case, his shoulder from the sword, and then traveling to the place where the sword was made. And I know Steven Erikson has said that the idea that he hadn't read Tolkien at the time he started writing the Malazan Book of the Fallen, when Tolkien wasn't an influence. But the idea of having to return the thing to the place of its making, the magical weapon, to return it to the place of its making, to destroy it there, is obviously familiar from a certain ring that needed disposing. But then again, obviously, Tolkien also took that idea and from his interest in mythology and legendary, obviously. So, not saying that. I guess it's at this point we kind of know it probably more through Tolkien than through anyone else. The idea of having to return a weapon, a magical weapon, to the place of its forging to or creation to destroy it. Which, on the other hand, also works nicely with Steven Erikson's penchant for circular or elliptical structures. So there's that. Yeah, I feel that kind of covers it for now. The crippled god has been robbed of one agent in the world, in the Malazan world. We'll see what he's gonna do next. We obviously will also need to figure out what happens to everyone's favorite Toblikai, who seems to be a god by now, or at least something of a god himself. Which, oh gods. Yeah, I guess that wraps it up. I really enjoy Reaper's Gate. I do like the extended narrative of Midnight Tides, and Reaper's Gale is probably my favorite one within the Malazan Book of the Fallen, I feel. When you look at the subplots, I guess. And we'll see where things go next week with Toll the Hounds. Until then, cheers.